Hello, and welcome to the Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the 14th Sunday after Pentecost for the week of August 25th, 2024, and I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to begin this week's podcast, and I'm excited to be in the final week of this Bread of Life discourse. Whew! It is a bit of a challenge constantly going through John and his theology and being able to try to think creatively on how do we bring in a scientific topic with it. It is some heavy hitting that he brings into this. But I will say, I think it also, these weeks, they're very difficult because I think it forces us to reflect and think really deep. It forces us to really be able to grasp some different concepts and really go a lot deeper within our faith than I think we're typical. So in a way, yes, it's frustrating, but in a way it's also exhilarating at the same time because it's such a challenge, because it forces you to keep going deeper and thinking deeper. And it's the reason why this is broken up over multiple weeks, because there is so much there to be able to digest and really think about. And this week is no different. This week, I think we found an interesting way of bringing this all together. So stick with me on this one, because I really do believe that this is really going to be worthwhile thinking about and really digging deep into. But before we do that, let's look back on the question from last week, which was, where do you go to gain wisdom? And one of the responses we got back this week was just age. That going through life, you obtain wisdom. And the person has this question he likes asking people of, would you like to go back and repeat being 20 years old? And of course, many people would. But then he asks, would you do it again knowing what you knew at that point, not knowing what you know now? And then the answer typically turns to no. And I think that's a really important thing, that there is a value that it's hard to place on life experience and the wisdom that comes from that. And I think that is super valuable. I would also argue, I think another place that I really enjoy gaining wisdom is finding places where one can slow down. Be it that it's through doing observation, or be it just being alone with your thoughts, I think is a key aspect to being able to gain wisdom in order to process and mentally be able to think about and gain these different ideas and being able to really go deeper as we are getting with the book of John. It takes time, and it's not a quick and easy process. It's something that takes processing time, takes processing energy to really get there. And so I think it's one of those things that it's super valuable, but it also means that we need to make time and space for it. And we'll get into, I think, a little bit more of that wisdom aspect a little bit more this week. So let's just jump into it. The semi-continuous Old Testament text this week is from 1 Kings chapter 8, optionally verse 1, verse 6, verses 10 and 11, then 22 through 30, and 41 through 43. There are some important verses that are optional this week, and it's what we're understanding in this is a few things. One, Solomon has finished the temple and is asking the priests to bring the Ark of the Covenant there. And they are then in the place, and this is where then Solomon goes into this long praise of who God is, and recognizing that it's been the presence of the Lord who has guided Israel through his father and now through him, and recognizing that it is only God that's going to be able to continue to steer Israel and where it's needing to be. And in doing that, it's the love that God has for us which is driving this, and the aspect that as we spend time with the Lord, we start being able to observe and acknowledge the different ways that God is also doing this blessing. It's not a one-way relationship. It is the two-way relationship in that there is this desire within the Lord to have a relationship with us. And as we have this relationship, understanding how deep this connection really is, that we can see the blessings of what God is doing for us. And I think that's really what the heart of what Solomon is getting at. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 84, all 12 verses of it. And this then becomes this psalm of longing to be with God, longing for the joy of life, longing for this recognition of who God is and recognizing all the blessings that are around us. And this longing is a different type of longing. It's a longing with joy, but it's a longing also that you're just wanting to get closer and closer to who God is and recognizing what God is all doing around us. The other Old Testament text you can choose from this week is from Joshua chapter 24, verses 1 to 2a and 14 through 18. This is a very familiar text that gets taken out of context to some extent. It has been especially brought up a lot in the last couple decades here, coming from verse 15, and it's the second half of this. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. But this is a text where Joshua has been the scout that helped acknowledge that we could go into the promised land. After Moses dies, he becomes the leader. They go into the promised land. There are some places that went well with taking in the people. There were some that caused conflict. And what we learn throughout the book of Joshua is this recognition on, as long as we are continuing to stay and be close to who God is calling us to be, that then things go well. And in doing that, we become closer and closer with God. So we have then the people of Israel being able to come back into the promised land, and we have chapters of how it's going to be broken up. And this is part of the final discourse, the final preachings of Joshua, the final gatherings where he is giving these speeches. And this is part of that speech. And this recognition on how we need to continue to stay dependent on our relationship with God. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 34, verses 15 to 22. This then is recognizing that it's the Lord that is going to continue to steer us. It is the Lord who is guiding us through our difficult times. And recognizing that the Lord hears us when we're crying out, hears when we are being crushed and brokenhearted, as we are coming from verse 18, our afflictions, recognizing that God is within amongst us for the whole journey. And even as there are wicked things that come up, even though there are times where things are hard, that continually the Lord will continue to provide and be there with his servants, guiding us through. The New Testament text this week is out of Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 20. This then is Paul recognizing that this power that we have comes from the Lord, and with that power is the recognition that there is not parts of this life that is not necessarily happy that we have this power. It is trying to take away this power. So it's this recognition that we need to put on, quote unquote, the armor of God, recognizing that we need to recognize the different aspects of who God is, how that has been embedded within us, and also recognizing that God is doing that along with us, that is, God is standing alongside of us to be able to do this, so that we are acknowledging that and working with that, and working with the Lord to be able to tap into these different gifts that the Lord has for us to be able to take on these difficulties of this life that come from the evil one. The gospel text this week is out of John chapter 6, verses 56 to 69. Jesus continues with the bread of life discourse, and it gets difficult. And we see this specifically in verse 60, is after Jesus had kind of continued to lay out that this is the bread come down from heaven. The disciples who are there and the people being there are kind of being considered disciples, that this teaching is difficult, and Jesus is in the synagogue doing this. And Jesus then responds with, does this offend you? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is useless. The words that I have spoken to you are the Spirit and life. But among you, there are some who do not believe. And this is that recognition then of Jesus bringing in that he knows that he's going to be betrayed, but also this recognition of, yeah, some of this stuff is difficult. And is that hard for you to comprehend? Is this going to make this a difficult thing for you to be able to grasp onto, is because this is difficult? And yes, we get the response that this is kind of breaks the spirit of some, and some just no longer can follow him. The ones that are still there, Jesus then asks, do you believe this? And this is then we get Simon Peter giving another one of these brilliant moments that Peter has. Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. This recognition of who Jesus is, and that they are grasping, at least at this moment, that this is a life worth living, that the Lord has something that they desire and crave and is going to be able to fulfill them much longer than what their understanding is. So, before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we'll do a shameless plug for Working Preacher. If you can check out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between the Sermon Brainwaves podcasts or commentaries or discussions, since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some different ideas and direction on what to look into, what to think about, what to talk about. And I think it's a really amazing resource over there. So if you haven't ever checked out workingpreacher.org, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week overall, but they also have some really great art, prayers, hymns, colors, and some amazing daily devotions. It is an amazing resource, especially if you're looking at these texts trying to think about it creatively. Take a look at the art. Look at how different people have interpreted these texts throughout the world artistically. It's an amazing, great resource. And if you haven't checked out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library, I'd highly recommend it. Finally, I'd highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter, but it's going to be going through ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies to be able to bring up into your weekly preaching, while the newsletter also brings in some different events, but also just different ideas to be thinking about, especially more geared with conservation for the planet. If you enjoy listening to me for a half an hour each week, look at and think about these texts, you're going to enjoy these resources. So I'd highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publications. Those will be the first link down in the show notes. Difficulty. Are you struggling with this because it is difficult? I find that as an interesting call out that Jesus is getting at. I think it's a moment where Jesus is getting at that life isn't going to be easy all the time. But I think it also shows how, as we as people are designed to be, we are designed to be curious. We are designed to wonder. We are designed to think deep. We are designed to not fully comprehend. And I think there is one person that I'm going to give my wife credit as I was trying to figure out how to tie different things together. This person popped into her mind, and I thought it was a great analogy. And I think it's a refreshing analogy, especially within the world that we're in. Because today we're going to talk about a true Renaissance man. A Renaissance man who is known as a painter, but has contributed as much and potentially more to the world of science. But it's also very debatable because he contributed some significant pieces to the art world as well. And that person is Leonardo da Vinci. Now, Leonardo da Vinci is an interesting story in and of himself because he is born out of wedlock and is kind of this person who is born into a slave, a mistress type of relationship, and the father takes him in, but is not his full son, and he realizes even though his father is quite wealthy as a lawyer, he is not really going to get anything, but his father sets him up decently well within the guilds to be able to be under the apprenticeship to become an artist. And one of the things that Da Vinci was very good at was observation. He showed that there was a keen eye for artwork and quickly was seen even by his teacher, Verenzino, that he was quite good within his whole group of apprentices to the point where he kind of understands that Da Vinci potentially is better. Now, Da Vinci ended up going throughout Italy throughout his life for various reasons, especially an early on case where he was accused of having homosexual relations, and this is very against the church at the time, and they showed no evidence, but that's caused him to kind of begin his journeys in his early 20s kind of throughout Italy for the most part, and in the later parts of his life he ended up dying in France. And he was known as an amazing artist, but part of the art that they were creating was not purely just portraits. Art was also considered bridges and engineering to some extent. This kind of sparked different interests within Da Vinci, where we have, looking back at the journals now, where Da Vinci was looking at a lot of specifically different war engineering, being able to make different types of machines for war. And throughout his life, he was really intrigued by this, or at least most of his life. And part of this is just growing up the way that he did and seeing that as the hero aspect of it. But just this acknowledgement of this looks really interesting. And in the later years, he finally gets the opportunity and finds out how the bloodthirst that humans have for each other was not really what he thought it was all cracked up to be. But additionally, at different points in his life, and Da Vinci kept great journals. We have a lot of his journals, not all of his journals. But one of the things that Da Vinci really did do was he dug up cadavers under probably the cover of night and didn't really let people know, and took extensive drawings and notes and different ideas and testing and looking at and experimenting on these cadavers on how the lungs work, what muscle structures look like. And if you haven't ever before, look up some of these drawings. They are quite incredible. On top of that, throughout Da Vinci's life, he ends up moving into just constantly being curious, constantly thinking about different things and writing down some early sketches for parachutes, to the early helicopters, to even things like we talked about, machine guns that were well ahead of their time, tanks well ahead of their time. The thing that is most curious is just constantly being curious. In fact, toward the later years of his life, he makes the statement that I am trying to build essentially a winged device for man to fly, and if I do not accomplish it, some other man will figure out how humans can fly. And again, we recognize the early journals still to this day of Da Vinci being one of the things that helps us guide where we're going. Being able to look at some of his notes and then being able to continue to confirm. There has been many of these different ideas, theories, things that Da Vinci was curious about or writing about or testing, and even talking a little bit about his theory on how to do scientific method was fairly similar to what we have today, where you have to keep testing and thinking about things and contemplating. We have to remember, though, Da Vinci wasn't trained in any of this. Da Vinci had an amazing art career and was continued throughout most of his life being commissioned to do different art pieces. Yet, Da Vinci kept having these ideas and wanting to explore and challenge and grow and wonder. One of the things I ended up hearing this week was one of the best gifts of Da Vinci was that he was extremely observant, and we can see that in his sketches and the Mona Lisa and all his different artwork. But he was also extremely curious, constantly wanting to understand and grow and think and keep going. There wasn't a set destination on where Da Vinci was going to get. This got me thinking, and I ran across a video from another YouTuber named Sam Reed. And he talked about going to this place, the quietest place in America, which is a specific point within Olympic National Park that is seen as super quiet. And he's talking about how in the world in which we're in, we're constantly go, go, go. There's more and more noise. There's more and more time where we're filling the void of every moment of our lives. So we're constantly busy. And the question of getting to at the end is it really productive busyness? He took a section from an interview from Charlie Rose of the late great Mr. Fred Rogers. And Mr. Rogers is talking about the same thing, that this question on is our drive for knowledge and having more and more facts causing us to wonder less. The more and more noise that we have gotten in our world causing us to actually get to less contemplation, less processing, less wisdom potentially, because we can't actually interpret and think to be able to get these facts more ingrained and have additional questions. We've talked about this multiple times within the podcast that any good scientific study leads to more questions than it does answers. It may give you an answer to something that you're looking at, but it should lead to more questions that you're wondering based off of now the information that you know. This is showing continued wonder. We can look at Da Vinci and the thousands and thousands of pages that he wrote, that he was constantly wondering, constantly contemplating. Heck, they are seeing that there is parts of his journals that he may have been truly the person who figured out gravity, that he was doing some early sketches and understanding that movement was part of gravity and how it all worked. It's incredible to think about. We're looking back nearly 500 years and still looking at these journals of this person. What was different? They reflected, they wondered, they continued to have this curiosity that drove them to continue to move forward. Is that not what Jesus is talking about in the gospel? Is this hard? Is this too hard for you? Is it gotten to be so hard that you can no longer wonder what this is that I'm talking about? This bread of life from heaven is so hard for your mind to comprehend that you just give up and walk away because this guy is too much of a basket case for me to spend the time, work, and effort to understand? Or is it so intriguing to hear somebody talking about something so different, so radically different, that it's worth exploring and spending time to understand? To make sure that you understand what they're talking about so that you can wonder with them. We know that, yes, this is a moment where Peter is at a bright moment. We know that Peter isn't always perfect. And we can see moments where Peter has doubt as well. Peter is, within the Gospels, one of the most relatable characters in and of that. Peter is very much like us. But Peter continues to strive to go forward. Peter continues to wonder and question and think about things and have these moments of great revelation like this week, and yet then also have weeks where you can tell the pieces aren't all together yet. We have a creative God who created this place. And I think there is an aspect of that we have to acknowledge, that we have a God that is wanting us to be curious. Explore this place, understand this place, but as you understand, there's going to be more and more questions, and thus come back and let's talk. There's going to be things that are hard, and I'm going to be there with you, but realize that I've also given you tools to be able to take this stuff on that's challenging, that's hard. That's the Ephesians text. We have times where we give praise to God. We have times where we acknowledge, look at the amazing things that God has gifted us the ability to be able to do. The time period in which we're at. The amazing things that God has done in the past and the amazing things that God will do in the future. Solomon. And we see that even in the Joshua text, bringing the people from Egypt, having them be led by Moses, being promised the promised land, getting into the promised land. Yes, there's been difficulties. Yes, some things were smooth, some things were rough, but yet God continues to provide and be there for his people. Are we not going to continue to serve God in that? Are we not going to make sure that we continue to acknowledge that? I think we need to continue to be curious. We need to continue to strive to be Renaissance men and women. We need to continue to strive to be curious and acknowledge and get our hands in a lot of these different ventures because it helps us explore who God is. And that's what's exciting. Because as we figure out one new part, it will bring on so many new questions and help us really get better and better grasp of who this God is that we serve. So the question I have for you this week is, where are you curious? Where are you curious? I know for me, I enjoy learning about birds. I enjoy learning about history. I enjoy digging into these science concepts. I enjoy trying to figure out how and connect all these different things together. I'm one of those people that I'm curious about a lot of different things. I like learning. And that's an important thing to me, is continuing to grow and learn. Because I think, in my opinion, that's the God in which we serve wants us to continue to grow and learn as well. But I think, like we talked about last week, that takes time, that takes wisdom, that takes contemplation. And one of the things that Da Vinci struggled with was sometimes meeting deadlines, because he was doing certain things and making promises, and yes, it paid the bills, but Da Vinci also had other interests, and Da Vinci was wanting to try to figure different things out. I think there's a human-related element within that even today, where we feel the tear between work and all the other aspects of life. But I think it's also part of the human experience and part of God saying, yes, I want you to serve and work so that you continue to show the blessings and that you'll learn from the blessings. And I can see how this relationship that you're acknowledging me in this and making sure that you're giving back. But I think also the curiosity to continue to grow and learn and be empathetic is a big part of it. I really do believe that Mr. Rogers was onto something as well. And as we continue to think that we're just purely fact driven, it leads us astray. The thing that's amazing to me about Da Vinci is there's things that Da Vinci literally committed his whole life to. And especially even at the end, I'm wondering, and there's just not resources for me to be able to build this different stuff, but somebody will find this useful. Somebody will build upon this. And that's what happened. We've gotten deceived in certain ways, and I'm a tech fan myself, where there's constantly things to be changing and new and evolving, and there's constant movement. But there's also a lack of wisdom in that, because you're constantly trying to figure out something new. There's a lack of wisdom in the aspect that sometimes we really need to sit and contemplate, and it might take more time than that. It's not going to be a yearly refresh. It might take multiple years to really get to the heart of what we are needing to do to make something better, to help us understand and contemplate something. I think that's more what this world is needing, because I think in doing that, we're going to learn so much more and grow so much more and be able to be true Renaissance people that have been changed by who Christ has been, and recognizing that there's going to be difficult times. There's going to be times that we're challenged and told that God is with us. And there's going to be times that then we get to those mountaintops and we can see and look back and say, yes, God was. That through the whole thing, that God was there. And we have to be able to acknowledge it, work with it, and spend time with it. And in doing that, if we're spending that much time with God, we better have a curiosity about who this God actually is. And maybe, just maybe, we figure out more of who we are as well. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.